China detains more than 1 million Uyghur Muslims.
2 Canadians have been held in a Chinese jail.
China's an aggressive power, and it wants not so much partners, it wants vassals.
The rise of communist China is an undeniable reality, as this once impoverished agrarian society has transformed into one of the superpowers of the world. But with accusations of espionage, oppression, and arm-twisting diplomacy, is this a threat that Canada's politicians have really taken seriously? Did they ignore the possibility of a lab leak during COVID-19? And have some been co-opted or even compromised by China's communist regime?
Something weird is going on about the relationship between Trudeau and China. I don't know what it is.
My name is Aaron Gunn, and this is Politics Explained.
It's a new type of coronavirus.
The number of cases has spiked over the past week. Close to 6,000 cases, and 16 countries outside China have confirmed cases.
Declaring a public health emergency of international concern.
On January 30th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared a global health emergency for what would eventually become known as COVID-19, a virus that has now claimed the lives of over 4 million people and wrought unprecedented economic damage around the world. But since those early days of the pandemic, serious questions have begun to emerge about where exactly the virus came from, when it began to circulate, and if its existence was at first covered up by China's communist regime. 1 month earlier, on December 30th, 2019, Dr. Li Wenliang, a specialist at the Wuhan Central Hospital, sent an urgent message to his fellow doctors and local officials, alerting them of an outbreak of a new SARS-like virus. But instead of reporting the viral cluster to the WHO as required by international health authorities, Chinese officials attempted to cover it up, dispatching police to the home of Dr. Li, accusing him of spreading rumors and forcing a signed retraction. The start of a determined campaign to obfuscate and conceal critical information that would end up hindering the global response to the disease. This included efforts to block any and all inquiries and investigations into the origins of the virus, particularly those that entertained alternatives to the state-sponsored narrative of animal-to-human transmission via a wet market in Wuhan, China. To get a sense of what exactly might be going on, I sat down with Dr. Charles Burton, a former professor from Brock University and China policy expert.
The default position is that these kinds of viruses are zoonotically related, and we have our bird flu and swine flu, and we so long after the COVID-19 has emerged, we haven't been able to come up with that zoonotic explanation. So it then calls into question whether there's some other explanation.
In August of 2021, multiple reports from the US government and US government officials concluded that the possibility of an accidental lab leak serving as the origin for COVID-19 was not only possible, but perhaps even likely, thrusting a once far-fetched conspiracy theory into the mainstream debate.
Oh, you know who we could ask? The Wuhan novel respiratory coronavirus lab. The disease is the same name as the lab.
What I see is a very likely possibility that this pandemic started from an accidental lab incident followed by a criminal cover-up.
And not only does it now seem like a serious possibility that COVID-19 originally leaked from the Wuhan lab, but some are suggesting it may have been in circulation as early as September.
More and more intelligence is coming to light that suggests that scientists from the Wuhan Institute of Virology were admitted to hospital in the fall of 2019 with COVID-like symptoms.
In fact, many now point to the Wuhan Military World Games held in late October as a possible superspreader event for the virus. The games were attended by thousands of military members from around the world, including Canada, many of whom reported falling ill with COVID-like symptoms. One of these individuals, a senior member of Canada's Armed Forces, agreed to speak with me on condition of anonymity, saying, quote, "Yes, I and a number of Canadian and international athletes became seriously ill. This is well documented in the press and medical files. Terrible fever and lung congestion, complete exhaustion. I have never been so sick. This was not taken seriously." In a leaked document from January 2020, the Surgeon General of the Canadian Forces acknowledged this potential for exposure, although concluded the risk was negligible. This conclusion was drawn, however, before new evidence had emerged that significantly altered the timeline of COVID-19. But if the virus did in fact leak from the Wuhan lab back in September, months before it was reported to the WHO, could China's Communist Party really have kept it a secret this entire time?
If it came from the lab, the Chinese Ministry of State Security has certainly done outstanding work in suppressing the information from leaking out. But if it turns out that in fact, COVID-19 originated due to an error in the lab, what would be geopolitically significant would be if the senior leadership of the Chinese Communist Party was aware of this and suppressed the information, resulting in countries abroad not taking the kinds of steps that we might have taken against this if we'd known what was really going on.
But to understand whether China's Communist Party, or CCP for short, might engage in such a cover-up, it's important to know a little about their history. The CCP officially took power in China in 1949, when, after nearly 20 years of civil war, the revolutionary communist leader Mao Zedong officially proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China. Following the example of Stalin and the Soviet Union, Mao would introduce a totalitarian communist system and his very own cult of personality. Up until his death in 1976, Mao led China as a virtual dictator, using force and coercion and silencing his political opponents along the way. In fact, between his countless purges and famines, it's estimated that between 40 and 80 million Chinese died as a direct result of his policies. But after Mao's death and overtures from the United States, China's communist regime began to change its tune, opening up its economy and welcoming foreign investment. During this time, leaders in the West hoped this economic liberalization would lead to democracy and an everlasting peace. But the CCP, now under new leadership, had other plans.
Ordinary Canadians, when you talk about the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, they would think of it in the mindset, in the mind frame as the Liberal Party of Canada, and that would be the biggest mistake that they could make. No political party that you and I or anybody in the West understand accumulates so much power. The People's Liberation Army, the PLA, it's the army for the party. The legislature, it's completely controlled and appointed by the so-called CCP party. The banking system, the economy, the corporations, they hold loyalty to the CCP. Never in human history has a regime that is so powerful. That's what we're talking about.
In recent years, China's communist regime has come under an increasing amount of scrutiny for their increasingly belligerent behavior, including accusations of espionage, intellectual property theft, and the militarized intimidation of their neighbors. And this belligerence has recently been extended to us here in Canada.
So the latest developments in what has become a wider diplomatic dispute between Canada, China, and the United States.
These two Canadians have been held in a Chinese jail with little exposure to anyone other than their interrogators and a monthly visit by Canadian officials.
In December 2018, two Canadians, known colloquially as the Two Michaels, were arrested by the Chinese government and baselessly accused of espionage, an action widely viewed as a geopolitical hostage-taking in response to the legitimate arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou in Vancouver.
They are human pawns. Chinese believe in trades. We all know that that happened soon after we arrested Meng Wanzhou. And so the obvious price is Meng Wanzhou to Michaels.
It seems that the Chinese government feels that holding Kovriken's favor has been effective in furthering Chinese regime goals in Canada.
Despite the flagrant hostage-taking of 2 Canadian citizens, the Trudeau government offered a meek, almost non-existent response. In fact, we remain the only country of the Five Eyes intelligence network to not ban the controversial Chinese company Huawei from building our next-generation 5G network, neglecting to follow the lead of our allies in the UK, US, Australia, and New Zealand. I met with Sam Cooper, author of the best-selling book Willful Blindness, to learn more about the history of Huawei and what the consequences of this decision might be.
Let's talk first what my reporting has shown about Huawei. First of all, Huawei benefited from the Chinese state hacking of Nortel, the theft of Canada's crown jewel secrets, which were leading the way on 5G. Canada could have been the world's leader. The corporate network in Montreal that backs the Liberal Party has a big soft spot for the Chinese state and Huawei.
And what do you think our allies make of this decision?
It's perplexing is the word. In certain intelligence agencies, they're looking with concern at what's happening in Canada.
But it's not just massive Chinese corporations that could present an espionage threat to Canada's interests. It could also be corrupted Canadian officials here at home.
And there was one Canadian who was arrested and to my knowledge is facing charges right now, Cameron Ortis.
Ortis was the most senior intelligence officer in the RCMP. So the allegations against Ortis are that he was selling the RCMP's most sensitive targeting information to the world's most powerful and wealthy money launderers and to state actors for personal benefit.
Cameron Ortis, a top RCMP intelligence official, was arrested in September 2019 and charged with multiple Security of Information Act violations, breach of trust, and computer-related offenses in what many consider one of the most serious intelligence breaches in recent history. And yet, what happened at one high-security research facility in Winnipeg might be even worse.
Not just Huawei, the Winnipeg lab case, what looks like a very troubling potential espionage situation where pathogens being sent to the Wuhan Institute, the place that is now the focus of a growing sort of investigation into whether a lab leak could have triggered the coronavirus. We have Canadian scientists who were working on dangerous research with China's military and adding to the capacity of the Wuhan lab. That is, Canadian expertise and IP was funneling straight to the Wuhan lab.
And oddly enough, when this story became public, the Trudeau government inexplicably blocked the release of documents that would have provided details about what exactly happened. But in many ways, state-sponsored espionage and hostage-taking is just the tip of the iceberg for a regime that, at times, seems almost indistinguishable from a powerful criminal organization.
A network of the most powerful transnational gangs. I had the records showing their money laundering activity and their connections to these whale gamblers that I found through additional documents are high-level Chinese state figures. So there's a direct connection, it's undeniable.
Money laundering out of China is a common practice and at times may even be undertaken by Chinese families for legitimate reasons. Since the CCP technically limits the amount of money its citizens can take out of the country, wealthy Chinese individuals instead take pseudo-loans with triad gangs, handing over cash in China and receiving it back in Canada in Canadian dollars minus a fee. This money, which often in reality is duffel bags full of cash procured through the illegal sale of drugs, is then laundered through casinos in cities like Vancouver, before being pumped in many cases into the local real estate market.
The Chinese senior official associated person who desires to purchase real estate in Vancouver takes that money and turns it into casino chips, and then the casino chips are turned into $100 bills.
Richmond, BC especially, and the River Rock Casino, incredibly egregious bulk cash money laundering. contrary to all laws or money laundering due diligence, will take that apparent drug cash, that is real hockey bags with up to 1.2 million was the largest ever transaction recorded. This is one person carrying a bag with 1.2 million into the casino. They're connected high in China. They're doing massive casino money laundering in Vancouver. And they're doing it through the hands of the most powerful and dangerous gangsters in Canada, a triad which has come to dominate the heroin and now fentanyl industry in North America.
That's right. These same Chinese gangs responsible for money laundering are also responsible for the importing of fentanyl precursor to Vancouver.
Factories in China are producing the world's supply, basically, of chemical precursors that is used to mix up, let's just say, fentanyl. So the factories in China are sending the precursors to Vancouver. There are labs, super labs in Vancouver that are pressing up fentanyl pills. Of course, a lot of the fentanyl is going into heroin in the downtown east side. This is where we have thousands of Canadians dying. To boil it down, Vancouver has become a hub of chemical narcotics production for precursors coming in from China.
But is there any evidence to actually suggest that Chinese officials are working directly with these triad gangs?
Well, you do see photographs of senior Chinese officials with persons that we have identified as being part of triad organized gangs, including senior officials at the Vancouver consulate.
In countries such as in Iran and China, the most powerful criminals are working with state actors.
So if the Chinese regime is colluding with organized crime to launder money, export fentanyl, conduct espionage, and steal our technology, not to mention openly kidnapping 2 Canadian citizens, why then has Canada's response been so restrained? And why do some in Canada's political and corporate establishment continue to act as full-time apologists for China's communist regime? Is it possible that some of these individuals have been co-opted or even corrupted by the CCP?
A powerful person coming out and saying that Canada should accept the Huawei 5G network. This is a message that serves the Communist Party. Why is a powerful, ex-Canadian politician or a well-connected lawyer from Montreal saying this kind of message?
The degree of elite capture in Canada is much higher than in Australia or New Zealand, which is very troubling.
Elite capture goes from municipal city halls across Canada up to I'm aware of people at the cabinet level and senators that have been captured.
And how about Canada's current Prime Minister? Is his lack of direct action toward China savvy geopolitics, or part of some bizarre affinity for the Chinese regime?
One would have to be breathtakingly dumb to repeatedly make decisions at your nation's expense in favor of a hostile power the way he has done. Well, let's remember Trudeau's personal ideological disposition on this. He's at a fundraiser about 7 years ago.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say we need to go green as fast as we need to start investing in solar.
And then everyone thought, well, this is just the trust fund baby showing how shallow he is. I think he believed it.
And while it's one thing to praise the Chinese dictatorship, it's another altogether to actively give them taxpayer money.
He gave the Beijing $250,000 Canadian tax dollars for the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which has a stated purpose to recreate the ancient Silk Route and give China hegemony across Eurasia and into the Middle East.
And even more baffling than giving $250 million to a Chinese-controlled bank, Trudeau has been unwilling to criticize China's role in the outbreak of COVID-19, despite given the opportunity to do so over and over again.
When we told him to close the border to COVID in, I think it was January or February of 2020, He said that was racist, of course. He took a month, and during that time, 60,000 people came from China, including 2,000 from the Wuhan province. They have been nothing but hostile, and yet you're looking to buy your vaccines, for the stuff that you're going to put into your citizens' veins. And they said, no, we're just kidding. CanSino was not giving you a vaccine. And of course, we were back of the bus with all the others. But like, what was going on in his brain at that point?
But China does not limit its use of influence and coercion to China's richest and most powerful citizens. They also use front groups like the United Front to pressure and intimidate everyday Canadians of Chinese descent into towing the party line.
Well, the United Front it's a communist party tool. And they run United Front through consulates in cities worldwide. And so the consulates basically direct community leaders in the Chinese Canadian community, all towards, fulfilling the ends of the Chinese state.
It's a subtle but yet clear message that I better be watch out.
And they've coerced elements within the Canadian-Chinese community and have threatened Canadian Chinese, which is horrendous because these are our citizens.
In one example, a number of Hong Kong Canadians gathered to pray for peace in Hong Kong in the, while major upheaval was going on in the summer and fall of 2019. And a mob of pro-Beijing activists surrounded this church. The Hong Kong Canadians had to be escorted to safety by Vancouver police.
Maybe nowhere has felt the direct consequences of increased CCP aggression more than the people of Hong Kong. A British colony between 1841 and 1997, when Hong Kong was finally returned to China's possession, it was done so with an explicit understanding that the territory would be governed under a one country, two systems principle, allowing Hong Kong to continue its democratic traditions as mainland China presumably caught up over time. Instead, the exact opposite has happened, with sweeping security measures being imposed that censored free speech and free expression, while police raided independent media, crushed peaceful protests, and sent pro-democracy activists directly to prison.
There are 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong, and these people are suffering great time now. Aaron, the original plan is to give China 50 years to catch up to the standard of Hong Kong. The rule of law, the full freedom of press, freedom of speech. We're seeing that Hong Kong is becoming just another China city. And now we are seeing, like West Berlin, we're seeing the fall of West Berlin into the Warsaw Pact. That's how significant it is.
But as horrible and appalling as the crackdown in Hong Kong has been, there is another region within mainland China itself that has suffered even worse. Since 2014, in the northwestern province of Xinjiang, over 1 million members of the Uyghur Muslim minority have been held in what can only be described as concentration camps. Although initially denied by the Chinese regime, the existence of these camps have since been confirmed by indisputable satellite imagery. Faced with forced labor, suppression of their religion, and widespread sterilization, this has been described by many, including the Canadian Parliament, as nothing short of genocide. To further understand the plight facing the Uyghur people, I met with Mehmet Tati, the executive director of the Ottawa-based Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project.
Digital control through camera, facial recognition, AI technology, even putting a QR code in your household. At the same time, physically detaining, interning millions of people in concentration camps. We lost contact with our family members, and we couldn't able to communicate with them. We could not able to send any emails or text messages or share photos, nothing. Because Chinese government installed the specific app on every Uyghur cell phone. That app monitors whom you received phone call, what kind of content you discussed. If your smartphone has any content of religion, you will end up in concentration camp. If you name your newborn with traditional Uyghur names with a reflection of Islamic heritage, you will end up in concentration camp.
For most, the concept of being detained by one's government in a concentration camp just for practicing your religion is likely a nightmare difficult to comprehend. But for Mehmet and his family, it's a lived reality.
I wonder from a personal level, like, do you have friends, family back there?
It is difficult, it is painful. The last time I spoke with my mother was on October 23rd, 2016. And last year, I testified before the Human Rights Subcommittee. I received a very disturbing message on my Twitter. And that message said, "Your mother is dead." Just 4 hours before my testimony. It was a kind of devastating message. And I read that message in two different ways. One is most likely my mother already killed. Or another way of reading is, if I move ahead and provide my testimony before the Human Rights Subcommittee of our parliament, most likely Chinese government is going to kill my mother. You can read in two ways. Whatever today the Uyghur people are experiencing today, I'm afraid it will be the future of many people. If China is unstopped, if China is allowed to continue like this.
One example of who could be next is the island nation of Taiwan. A thriving democracy with a first world economy, Taiwan and its 23 million citizens are viewed by China's communist regime as a breakaway province that firmly belongs under its control. And the CCP has not been shy about expressing its willingness to use military force to take the island back if necessary.
After Hong Kong, Taiwan is next. I think from my observation, they're just waiting for a good time. They're just buying time for their military to grow. They're buying time for Western democracies to continue to crumble within your and my lifetime. We will unfortunately see that if we don't do anything to change the course.
It is clear that China has arrived as one of the world's foremost powers, increasingly flexing its muscle in trade, saber-rattling diplomacy, and military intimidation, and not afraid to push smaller countries like Canada around to get what it wants. And while no one would suggest Canada pursue a purposely antagonistic policy, it is equally important we approach this relationship with our eyes wide open. Aware and alert of their designs abroad and oppression at home, skeptical of their official narrative on the origins of COVID-19, and vigilant to their attempts to influence and intimidate Canadian citizens, whether they be recent immigrants or the highest echelons of the Canadian government.
So it is the great threat of our times, and I think that there's more and more awareness of it, but we need to recognize that our past policies towards China have been weak and haven't served Canada well in this matter.
No, this is not a friendly relationship between people to people. This is the relationship between state to state, and a state relationship based on interest. It is not based on kindness or a politeness.
Canada is extremely important for China's future. Canada has no global strategy. Canada will never argue or block China's global strategy. Therefore, Canada can be used.
Seems increasingly like China views Canada as basically a doormat.
100%, a tool, a doormat and a tool.
It's time for Canadians to tell our government that we want to crack down on Chinese subversion and espionage in our country. And if there are Canadians in positions of influence who are in receipt of benefits from the Chinese regime, that we have to put a stop to it.
My name is Aaron Gunn, and this has been Politics Explained.